1 minute late. Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on which part of the globe you are. Welcome to the second DESIS Café. I think as some of you already know, the concept behind this event is to make DESIS Café a virtual place where every DESIS Lab can meet and talk about their activities, projects, thoughts, difficulties, whatever you want. So this is a place to talk informally, share ideas, and the purpose is to enhance the connections within our community and to foster knowledge exchange and share good practices. While you do that, you can enjoy a coffee if you want. I was very happy with the interest from so many DESIS Labs in hosting this event, and we are already booked until next year. Great.
Wow.
So
wow.
this shows that DESIS Labs are willing to connect with each other. To all of you that show interest, thank you, and we will get in touch soon to schedule everything. Also, I would like to say to you to save the date for the next DESIS Café, which will happen on the 21st of July and will be hosted by EdCD Madrid DESIS Lab. Hi, Pablo, you are here. I would also like to thank Audrey and her team, who was the first to volunteer to host the DESIS Café. And I hope today we have the opportunity to learn more about Stamps DESIS Lab and their work. So I give the floor to Audrey, that will be your host, and hope that we have a fruitful session.
Thanks so much, Teresa. I'm very excited about today and hosting the DESIS Café. I am the founder and the current director of the Stamps DESIS Lab at the University of Michigan. I'm also the director of our MDes in Integrative Design program at the Penny W. Stamps School of Art and Design. Deepa, can you advance the slide, please? I'm going to preface the DESIS Café presentation with some information about the DESIS Lab here at Stamps. It's a new studio space designed for collaboration. It's flexible with spaces and tools for both group and collaborative individual work, as well as a broad range of prototyping processes. It's located in a 33,000 square foot building that also houses faculty studios, project spaces, wood shop, metal shop, a digital media studio, and large shared working and meeting areas. Next slide. The Stamps DESIS Lab engages MDes graduate students in using design thinking and critical making to develop a transformational vision for what a society imbued with social and environmental justice would look like, and to map out potential pathways towards that transformation, again, through design thinking and critical making at every stage. There's some major questions that we aim to address in the Stamps DESIS Lab, and they include what kinds of systems and interactions within those systems would a truly decolonized society embody in our world? How might we use an integrative design approach to re-envision our educational systems, food systems, and housing networks for a just and sustainable future? Next slide. How might we use design methods in conjunction with cross-disciplinary methodology to investigate the barriers to these transformations? For example, how can we engage a public that may be saddled with pre-existing biases and misinformation, or the injustice systemically embedded in our economies, institutions, and built environments? Next slide. And how might we act on this research using our distinct integrative design approach to change production, consumption, learning, and other experiences that are currently dominated by hegemonic forms of extraction, exploitation, and stereotypes. Next slide, please. Today, I'm joined by Assistant Professor Deepa Butolia. She was born and raised in India and has been living in the US since 2009. Deepa's research is located at the intersection of models of knowledge and critical thinking emerging from multiple and global perspectives. After moving to the US, Deepa earned an MFA in industrial design from the University of Illinois at Chicago, along with a work experience that spans across architecture and design. Deepa's taught design courses at Carnegie Mellon and the University of Illinois at Chicago. She will be our lead co-host today. I am handing the mic now to the virtual mic to Deepa, who is going to tell us a little bit more about the theme of this DESIS Café and introduce her fellow co-hosts. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Audrey. My name is Deepa Butolia, and I'm assistant professor at Stamps School of Art and Design. We are really delighted to host this session, and we really want to thank Teresa for doing this and arranging this and the whole DESIS network. So today's discussion, we thought it would be the most beneficial if we could focus it on some of the major themes that we are exploring here at Stamps DESIS Lab. And one of the themes that we are focused on exploring is making futures. And what our presentation today would be centered around, and our discussions would be revolving around. Most of the projects that I and my colleagues would be introducing here are in the context of Detroit, Michigan, which is a local community. It is a major city in the United States and has a very interesting history that some of my colleagues would later on talk about. And this becomes the background and foreground of our research for many faculty in University of Michigan, not just our school. And the challenges faced by the city in terms of extreme poverty that has happened due to disinvestment and racism, and against the background of extreme wealth that was generated because of the motor industry basically being born here in Detroit. So the contrast that is created in this space and the systemic disparities that have existed has created this imbalance in this, not only in the city physically and psychologically, but this is also what a lot of faculty at University of Michigan are dealing with in terms of challenges in our work. And this is what I think a lot of us are going to talk about, the projects we are doing in context of Detroit, and Nick would be talking a little bit more about Detroit and its history later on. How we approach this space is we exercise a lot of caution, we take a lot of ethical considerations, and we partner with people who are based in Detroit to kind of work in terms of what role designers can play in dealing some of these issues and topics such as poverty. We integrate our teaching philosophy and research practice as making just futures. And as you can see in this image, it kind of aptly captures what's happening in Detroit right now with an abandoned housing and the motor industry's headquarters in the background. I'm also very glad to introduce my colleagues here who are also co-hosting with me and Audrey. Nick Tobier, Ron Eglash, and Roland Graff are all faculty here in art and design. And I want to briefly talk about the work I am doing, and then my colleagues would do the same. We are not diving too deep into our research here, just giving a glimpse of what we are doing in the context of making futures and in the physical, our local context of Detroit. So my research has been centered around this idea of that there's a need to challenge the imminent Eurocentric narratives in design and design futures, and introduce alternatives that take into account two reversal perspectives. To achieve this, I study, explore, and analyze ingenious making practices of the Global South that are often described in Hindi language as jugaad, which is basically a word that represents making do, and survival in situations where there are less resources. And I introduced the term critical jugaad as a decolonizing methodology through actions, modes of representations, discourse, and practice. In particular, I deal with the intersection of Global South and critical and speculative design. In context of Detroit, I'm studying the local versions of critical jugaad in terms of what are the making practices, what are the repair practices, how communities are dealing with oppression, how they are subverting power structures by these DIY making practices. And critical jugaad I see as practices that are critical, subversive, and very political. And these are not just practices that people engage with in terms of survival and making and repair, but people deal with these practices as a way of making their own just and sustainable futures. And with that intention, I am dreaming that this creates a pathway for an anti-racist design practice, and designers can be involved in envisioning and co-creating futures for these communities that are rooted in social justice. With that, I would sort of show up this image I am showing you, I think aptly captures what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to create here in terms of imagining and making futures from the margins. So the image on the left is a very famous statue and sculpture in Detroit. It's known as Spirit of Detroit. And the image on the right is a local resident's version of what Spirit of Detroit should be, which can show that how people in Detroit are taking the representation and imaginaries in their own hand and creating a pathway for just futures for all. With that, I would transfer the mic and the podium to my colleagues here who will talk about their work. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Deepa. Before I get a few moments here, I wanted to welcome a very special guest here, my great friend SB Thomas, who is one of the creative driving forces behind Sweet Potato Sensations, which is an incredible bakery in Northwest Detroit. And all of us here at Stamps are able to eat some of their delights. I will put their information in the chat later. They do ship, but while we eat, we think of you wherever you are in the world eating something delightful at this point. I have a sweet potato pie, Deepa has sweet potato, and a sweet potato pecan. I think Audrey, Ron, and Roland as well. SB, do you have a few moments to say hello and tell us a little bit about your family business and your visions for the role Sweet Potato Sensations plays in that incredible corner of Grand River?
Hey, what up, though, everybody all over the place, wherever you are. Let me make sure my mic is, oh, there we go. Now you can see me better. Hey, what up, though? That's traditional Detroit eatings, queen of awesomeness and second generation business owner of Sweet Potato Sensations. We're located on the west side of Detroit, We are family owned and operated for the last 33 years, creating everything sweet and extra dope out of sweet potatoes. So pies, cookies, cheesecake, cake, ice cream, cobbler, candy yams, muffins, cupcakes, cornbread, chicken, waffles, pancakes, grits, black-eyed pea, collard green soup. We're the sweet potato lovers, heaven on earth, and pumpkin's cousin with an attitude, continuously revolutionizing the way the world tastes sweet potatoes and also keeping the legacy of George Washington Carver alive. We've been in the neighborhood for 33 years. We're all about just doing things for the community, staying very, very involved in the neighborhood. I sit as the vice president of the Old Redford Business Association, as well as I host a grief support group for Black women called Where Do Black Women Go to Grieve? It's very important. I noticed that through my own grief journey of losing my fiance almost 8 years ago, that there was just no grief support for women or people in the neighborhoods. They had to go out to the suburbs to find some kind of support. So I went on my journey with that and just started to work with people that are grieving in all different kind of capacities. So it's just interesting just having a business in the neighborhood and being very, very involved in what happens and not just setting up, selling pies and going back home, but we actually live, work, breathe, feed people, love on people, pray for people, all kind of things that we do. And that in the, on the west side of Detroit. So that's a little super fast version of what we do. I'm trying to think, was there something else you wanted me to talk about, Nick, or anything else that was?
I mean, I think if you want to talk a little bit about how some of the things that you do with like natural hair and,
I forgot.
Yeah.
How did I forget about that? Lord have mercy. So my sister and I also started an event. Actually, it was 11 years ago, called Naturally Fly Detroit presents We Rock Dope Hair, a natural hair experience. So that's all, once again, part of us wanting to bring more programming, more things of relevance to the neighborhood. Beautiful things. I always say beautiful things happen in downtown Detroit, Midtown. It's great. But the gritty, the pretty, the heart of the neighborhood, the heart of the city is in Detroit neighborhoods. And so it is part of our mission, part of our driving force, if you will, to bring some funky programming, some interesting things to people that live in the neighborhoods, expose people to what's going on in these interesting pockets of the city where people may not go too often for whatever reasons, and just bring them into those pockets because there's a lot of fresh and beautiful things that are happening that they'll probably be surprised of. So we've been doing that, the natural hair event, for 11 years. Of course, because of COVID, we didn't do it last year. So we just celebrate women, we celebrate style, we celebrate Black women, we celebrate hair. We have 40 plus vendors in the artist market, all independently owned women businesses that are creating, crafting, doing interesting things, bringing them into their marketplace so they can actually sell to their direct customer. Using the Artist Village as our venue. We use the inside, the outside. So it's just, it's really, I really enjoy coming up with like interesting kind of things that activate our neighborhood and bring people to the bakery, bring people to Grand River and Gloucester, expose them to what we're doing. It just all goes together for our mission of just having a business there. We just want to make sure that we live, work, and play where we actually have a business and we actually care about where we are. People, when we first moved from across the street to where we are now, people were like, oh, you should go to the suburbs and open up out there. It'd be so great. And yeah, maybe, but a different kind of energy in a city. It's a different kind of purpose for me. And so we just try to do, like I said, the natural hair event, the grief work, the business association, all different kind of, I have some other things I'm working on for the summer, safe programming for the summer. There's a Sidewalk Arts Festival that happens over in our neighborhood.
Oh, I think we may have lost SB there. I hope she can come back. I will say that the sweet potato pies, if you've never had them, there's like a little nutmeg in them. They're fantastic breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I have had the sort of great opportunity and honor of working about 1.5 miles away from SB's family bakery. So I get to eat some form of food there almost every week. Most of my work focuses on the role of what I would describe as the intersection of functional and sublime creativity in young people. I helped co-found a place called the Brightmoor Makerspace, which is in a formerly unused garage. It's a 3,200 square foot open to the community workspace. So since we're in Detroit, there's a lot of emphasis on cars, and we talk about mobility, both literally as well as metaphorically. A couple of the projects that we have from this year that I just thought I'd highlight are an old school bus that we transformed into a incredible sort of painted fire-breathing dragon that's a mobile makerspace, and adjacent to that is an industrial tricycle that had been part of the surplus of a Ford plant in Detroit that we have transformed into a grocery delivery vehicle. And I should emphasize that although I am part of a collaborative design team, all of the work here is created and fabricated by high school students. Next slide, please. Deepa, if you could advance the slides. Yeah, thank you. I always say that we're not teaching bicycle repair or carpentry, but what we're doing is building creative confidence. And if we do our job well, I can sort of disappear or take a backseat from the equation. Right now, what you see on the slide here is a 900 square foot outdoor classroom that was built entirely by youth apprentice carpenters. You can see Kivona Griffin, who graduated from our high school program last year, is the foreperson on this job. This is over at St. Suzanne's Cody Rouge Community Center. During the COVID period, 95% of our young people are not coming back to school, even if schools reopen, because of high COVID rates in the neighborhood or amongst families. And we've found great access in being connected to the outdoors through our building work. Next slide, please. And I'll just leave you with this image, that if we do our jobs well, the best and the brightest in all of our neighborhoods, just like SB was saying, why don't you move to the suburbs? Many of the young people I work with at some point in their lives have thought that maybe they'd like to move to Atlanta, a place where there's sort of a strong, visible Black creative class. And if we have the ability to transform what might be vulnerable young people into young people who feel powerful to create the world that they want to live in their own neighborhood, then we've done a great job. This is a sidewalk that, along with my colleague Roland Graff and another collaborator here, we were able to transform behind our school from an ordinary sidewalk into this beautiful red running track. There's a speed activated pedestrian display. So when you run, you get to see how fast you're going. It has the wonderful accidental consequence of having cars think they're going too fast and they slow down. That's, I think, the last slide I have here. Do you want me to do the Detroit context really quick, Deepa? Okay. I just, for any of you who are outside of the US or outside of the region, just give you a quick orientation to the city of Detroit's landmass. You can see the map of the city there. You can fit the entire island of Manhattan, the entire and San Francisco and Boston into the physical square mileage of the city of Detroit and still have space left over. That's one of the sort of legacies of a city. Next slide, please. That it had a population of over 2 million, close to 1950, that has dipped below 800,000 today. This is, as you may or may not know, the city that Henry Ford built, for better or for worse. And so it has been built in the legacy of the auto industry, where both Black and white migrant communities came up from the South, the United States, as well as from other countries to have jobs in the factory industry, in the auto industry. And along with those migrations from the South came a lot of animosities, mistrust, and attitudes toward race that perpetuated in building a city that has historically been segregated and unequal. Next slide, please. And in that continuation of it, what we continually need to work against is what I might describe as a tale of two cities. On the one hand, the image is from the uprising in the late 60s, in which Black Detroiters who had been systematically disenfranchised by white property owners and overly aggressive police and military tactics rose up. And in the aftermath of that, give a city that to many outside eyes looked abandoned, yet was fully populated by people, families, churches, kids, and had images that you might have seen in movies like RoboCop, in which an abandoned inner city was left to a struggling underclass, while a inner ring of suburbs prospered. A lot of the media legacy of Detroit had to do with continuing to tell these tale of two cities. It is our effort in making justice to talk about a city that is designed and built by and for and with its residents rather than for speculators. All right, thank you, thank you. I think that's the end of the context slides. I'm sorry I raced through it. I'm always happy to talk more about the questions that we face.
What?
All right, is it Ron or Roland next? I think we have to switch.
Yeah, I think I will let Ron, I can stop sharing at this point and let, is Roland next? Are you sharing anything, Roland?
Yes, okay, 1 second. So, okay. 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, my name is Roland Graf. I collaborate a lot with Nick. I thought I show some projects today that address like making futures. It's also based here in Michigan, not directly in Detroit. I'm a media artist and designer, and also professor at the Stamps School of Art and Design, and I collaborate across disciplines to prototype future design spaces, such as with this Sunbound street video game, in which we call into question the screen-based foundations of commercial video game development. I show a short video clip. 1 second.
What are you doing? Look at this shit. It's a Pong game. Look. Oh, that's awesome, dude.
So this project creates, in a McLuhan sense, an artistic counter environment to anticipate shadows of future inventions. And it inspired another project that we have developed with a team of faculty and students from 4 different schools here, which also reframes the body and interactivity from the ground up with a greater focus on the accessibility of a system. So for this project, for iGym, and I stands here for inclusive, we did a lot of studies and play events, and my favorite interview quote was, "It basically adapts to everybody, even people without disabilities." And I think this sums up the idea of inclusive play very nicely. We currently work on productizing the system because many parents and also other stakeholders who joined the game after the user studies emphasize how important it is to make this prototype available for larger audiences. And our vision with this project is to build a kit that can be installed and switched on like any light projector, a video projector, or light fixture in a school gym or entertainment center. So yeah, this is just a quick teaser of some of the making future work here that I'm involved in. Thank you. Stop sharing.
I think we have Ron Eglash next, who will be talking about their amazing work in Detroit.
Detroit and elsewhere.
Elsewhere, yes.
Let me just get this into presentation mode. So just about every contemporary problem can be understood as a problem in the extraction of value, whether that's extracting ecological value or labor value or social value. But nature does not extract value, it circulates it in an unalienated form And that's the technique that indigenous cultures used. So if we want to decolonize design and our contemporary environments, a non-extractive generative economy is what we need to be shooting for. And this is an example from the village of Ntonso, where I spend a lot of time in Ghana. They extract bark from trees, boil down the bark to ink, throw the strained bark back into nature, and that helps regenerate the trees. So it's a circular economy. And that's one of the reasons why you see circular forms, fractal forms, so prevalent in Africa. So what we've been trying to do is to take these heritage algorithms, as we call them, and then translate that in some way into contemporary technologies. But that also needs to be done as a generative loop. It can't be a one-way pipe. And so we've created this open source, open access system for STEM education, where kids can come in and utilize these heritage algorithms and creatively engage with a non-European, in this case, African tradition, but also African-American, right? It's of constant innovation. Then we 3D render those. So here's a mannequin head that the student has created. That goes back into the braiding shops. And then the adult economy kicks in and starts to benefit from, but also contribute to that loop. And so we've done the same thing in Ghana using these heritage algorithms. This is Paul Boache from that village of Ntonso, some kids at a nearby school doing simulations. The graduates of Kwame Nkrumah University laser cutting the fabric, and then they've started a little shop. We're also working with traditional fabrication techniques using artificial intelligence to help tourists know the difference between industrial fakes being imported from overseas and the locally produced hand-woven cloths. This is a similar technique in Detroit, working at the African Bead Museum in Detroit, creating a greenhouse that's going to be the African futurist greenhouse where they can grow the beads that go into the shop store. So just to sort of summarize that, what we're shooting for is some repair to a broken system, a wounded economy. And so we think of these technologies as a kind of prosthetic that can bring back unalienated labor flow in circular form. Here's our online shop. You can go to africanfuturist.org and actually buy the shirts and the kente cloth that are being woven through that first one, Afrofuture Fashions. But the trick is to now not use Amazon fulfillment or Etsy or some platform that's owned outside the system, right? Because that's going to extract the value. And so we're working with Detroit artisans who are doing the e-fulfillment. And so their stores and the African stores are now included in this network. So the ultimate goal is a kind of ecosystem of a generative economy. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks a lot. So Professor Ron Iglash's background encompasses a range of disciplines: engineering, cybernetics, anthropology, STS, mathematics, computer science. And as Audrey has mentioned in the chat, he is also Audrey's life partner. So we are very excited about this work that's coming from Professor Iglash's research and Audrey's research, of course, and all the other wonderful projects that have come in this context of our research based in Detroit. I think this is all we had to present today about briefly about some of the trajectories and arcs of our research and what we are looking into. But most of the time, I think we are really focused on creating equitable and just futures. All design is about creating futures. If the design is not creating equitable and just futures, then it is not design. So that is what we believe in, and I think this should be the spirit of all DESIS Lab work. And with that, I will probably encourage everybody to. I can basically share our last slide. And so the discussion we are hoping would be generated around this idea of making futures. And some of the questions that we hope this wonderful community here could answer are, how can we think about making just futures by design? And we would like to see other examples and projects that folks here might be working on. What we also would like to know what roles can be played by speculative design, but combining cosmopolitanism and localism, and by rethinking concepts of social proximity and physical proximity, and then any other projects that the attendees here would like to share. So I would open it up for question answers, discussions, and want to hear from other people here.
You need to stop sharing, honey.
So Gisela has her hand up. Would you like to?
Actually, I didn't. Thanks for your presentation. It was very interesting, and I was just wondering if the projects with your students are going well, and and if they are framework in these questions that you put.
Okay, so are you trying, let me rephrase that so that I understand it better. Are you trying to see what, how are students answering these questions?
I think that's what I understood, Deepa.
Okay.
How are the students going about, addressing this question? And right now, the term is over, so the students dashed home. It's also close to the end of, hopefully the end of the pandemic. So they were quite eager to get back to their families, get vaccinated, et cetera. And that is the reason why they are not participating today in this event. This academic year has been quite challenging because it has had to occur virtually with a lot of social distancing. So in a good year with no COVID, we would be right in Detroit working with the communities directly. But because of COVID, we've had to engage our community partners virtually via Zoom. In the fall, Ron and I led an inquiry course where we were attempting to build a greenhouse at a bead museum in Detroit. And we engaged our students in this project as it represented a model of integrative design. And we've spoken about that model several times. And they did fabrication and visualization within the studio that I showed you pictures of, but they were not physically, engaged at the site where the greenhouse would be. We instead brought in the director of the greenhouse via Zoom, right? And other kinds of collaborative communication and design software that worked relatively, effectively, but certainly those tools can't replicate or replace what occurs in a making studio, right? Or just being in a community environment and interacting with the members of that environment around a particular design challenge. Now, with that said, our students took the initiative and went to Detroit anyway. We could not tell them to do that, require it, hold it against them if they did not, or even give them credit for it. But they did it anyway, so they risked, their lives, you could say, going to the site, and they did a wonderful video about it because they felt that in order to design for a site-specific place, particularly in Detroit, that they would need to see it, to engage with it, to be there. So they did that on their own. I would say that, it went relatively well, but again, that virtual studio can never ever replace what happens in real world kind of community engagement, right? Particularly with this kind of community as well. I hope that answers your question, Gisela.
Sure, thank you.
And so now the platform is open. If any of wonderful folks here would like to share some of their work, please feel free to share your screen at this time or talk about your work. I've seen a couple of comments in the chat from UFPR. I see that on this verge of ending the pandemic, a good contribution from design at strategic level is the contribution on policymaking via meta concepts, demonstrative cases. We are working at UFPR on projects that are dealing with the future of work, distributed manufacturing, new policies for mobility at city level, etc. Aguinaldo, would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, let me 1 second to just put. This is I see that at least in Brazil there is a need to help out policymakers on understanding what are the new ideas on how to use the change that were implemented by the pandemic, and helping to stay here what was good, what was, for example, the pandemic has shown that a more distributed economy is far more resilient than the conventional economy. So the local economy, the connected local economy is far more resilient. How to foster this? But I see that there is an urgent need to understand the new work opportunities. What are the new profiles of work on this pandemic, and how can we, instead of waiting for this to happen, then bad decisions can happen. How can we speed up the learning curve, and how to speed up these futures, these emerging futures, and drive them towards a more sustainable profile? For example, social cohesion. Here in Brazil, like in the US, we have lots of problems of social cohesion, particularly between poor and rich. And now with the pandemic, this difference between poor and rich has increased twofold. There's far more poor people than before. And so the lack of inequity, lack of equity and lack of social cohesion will increase further. So design definitely can help. And I see the meta concepts and demonstrative cases as a way to help, particularly policy making, either in companies or government, to understand the new futures. I see now that there is first for innovative ideas. The previous ideas are no longer viable. No? For example, so just want to give an example. One of our projects here is dealing with the textile industry. So I have a PhD student and a master's student working for the textile industry, understanding the future of work for those people that work at home producing clothing. But the pandemic, we need to, it cannot be done as it was done before. So how can we help them to have a proper work, all guarantees, all the health and so on, being involved on design, on manufacturing, being respected, being valuing the local culture, valuing the local resources, And then it's a new profile of work than you used to have before. Just an example.
Thank you for that, Aguinaldo. Would you mind what UFPR is abbreviation for? Would you mind telling us that?
It's a Paraná Federal University. I'm here in Curitiba, the capital of Paraná. It's next after São Paulo. It's the next capital. It's a 3 million people city. It's a small town, but it's well. And as you know, we are not doing so well on the pandemic. It was right now. I'm isolated in the countryside in a country house. So yes, doing design remotely here in Brazil, you continue at least for another 6 months or a year. I don't know. We are not really doing well. Don't learn from us. Or at least learn from our mistakes. No, I would gladly change governments if you want.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your work and all those thought-provoking ideas and questions. I am in the chat, and Ron has mentioned about KISA's project for online marketing of Detroit urban agriculture. Kisa is our master's student, and she has an amazing project, which is more locally rooted. Kisa is here. I don't know, Kisa, would you like sharing a few sentences about your work?
Oh, hey, how you guys doing? Well, hello, I'm excited to see everyone here. I participate a lot with the DSS students. My work is centered within community-driven agriculture. I use culturally situated methods and technologies, specifically like Black, African, Pan-African, as well as Aboriginal and Indigenous. I choose to situate myself within that space. It could be quite hard and difficult, but also fulfilling because I have to change within that space as well. I work a lot within food and farming systems, as well as food policy councils, to see how we can actually create a synergy of change within the local food system. So I'm very a hyper local designer, which means that that's also translated to global as well.
Thank you, Kisa. And I think that also augmented Audrey's point earlier, and also answers Gisela's questions about how students are taking on this work. There's a lot that Kisa has done, and I'm sure we can talk about that later. But it's not, I mean, her few sentences are not doing justice to the amount of work and the very important topics about food insecurity and justice that she's dealing with and working towards bridging that gap of disparities, especially for the African-American seniors in Detroit and its other adjacent communities. We also have Kelly Murdoch-Kitt here, is also a faculty in Stamps, and she is also doing wonderful intercultural design collaboration. Kelly, do you want to say something about your work?
Sure. Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting there for a second. But yes, so hi, I'm Kelly Murdoch-Kitt. I'm trying to get my video to work so I can see some of you, but you can't see me. Having some Zoom issues. Hi. So as Jeeva mentioned, I am an assistant professor here at the Stamps School of Art and Design. And my research is focused in how we can actually use design to improve collaboration, especially with people who are very different from each other, whether those are disciplinary differences, cultural differences, geographic differences, and sometimes those things all converge together. So this past semester, I initiated a new upper-level undergraduate course at Stamps called the Global Studio, and this actually helped fulfill a requirement for our students who at the undergraduate level have an international experience requirement that many of them could not meet this year due to all the travel restrictions with COVID. So this course brought together not only our group of students from Stamps, but We worked with students from the Srishti School of Art, Design and Technology based in Bengaluru, India, students from the National Institute of Design based in Ahmedabad, India, and students from Virginia Commonwealth University's campus in Doha, Qatar. And so there were 5 faculty, including myself and the faculty from some of these other institutions. And we had about 60 students. And so they worked together in different configurations of intercultural teams throughout the semester to first research the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and then they actually engaged in a Design Futures project where they were speculating what would happen with some of these goals 50 years into the future. So it was really interesting to see, especially bringing these very different cultural and geographic perspectives together on these topics where they ended up with things. So a lot of the things that have been discussed in this call so far, we're playing around with and we're converging in this studio. So yeah, so this is really exciting, engaging work. The students got a lot out of it. I'm hoping we'll be able to continue the course even as, you know, borders reopen and travel becomes more possible, because I see it as a really different opportunity than a lot of our traditional study abroad options. One of the students wrote in our course evaluations that I studied abroad before this course. That was one of the few students who had actually been able to go study abroad, and they were just doing this because they wanted more. They said, I studied abroad before this course and I was in class with all Americans. So they said this is a completely different experience because it actually put them in a situation where they had to meet, talk with, interact with, negotiate with, and listen to people who, you know, were completely different from them in so many ways. So we used a book that I had recently published as sort of the backbone of this course. It's called Intercultural Collaboration by Design, and I'll share a link for it in the chat. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for sharing that wonderful work that kind of shows our also the way faculty are not only locally focused, but also globally have a global outreach in terms of their project, pedagogy, and research. There's a question for me, and if anybody else wants to go ahead, please do, otherwise I'll answer that question. Or if you have a question for Kelly, we could take that too.
I think Nick had his hand up.
Oh, okay, Nick. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow that thread, Deepa, that you started, sort of combining this discussion that the presenters brought up about local, as well as sort of what Kelly was talking about the collaboration. And that was one of the questions that you posed in the slides, which is the potential connections between cosmopolitanism and localism. And I'd love to talk with everybody about that. I'd say one of my either revelations or, so I'm sitting right now in a little tiny hut, maybe, I don't know, 4 meters square, about 10 meters from our house. And much of my time over this year has either been spent in this little hut, but connected to friends, collaborators, practices around the world that I've been really interested in. And I'm curious how everybody has thought about the connection to their immediate circumstances during COVID and the connections that they then make with collaborators, peers, ideas around the world, whether it's COVID specific, or how you think differently about your work in the situation where we're all forced to be both very, very local in daily life, as well as being attentive to the world, and how that might affect your work in the future.
I don't know about others, but I would really love to hear from Ezio.
You are mute. You are mute. You have to unmute your micro.
I'm so mute that I muted my microphone. If possible, I would like to listen a little bit more.
Okay.
Potentially, I have a lot of things to react because we have had a lot of information, and of course I can state that this idea of the DESIS Café that managed by time by different labs is fantastic. And this is a very good idea. And I thank specifically Teresa and their team that imagine it. And I want only to say one thing, but afterward, maybe I say something else on the final issue about local and cosmopolitanism. Well, in between the many disasters that we have had with this COVID, there are something that changed also positively. So for us, DESIS, we started to use the possibility of this media, these platforms in which we are. And even if we had the platform even before, we have never used it or never used it in such an organized way. So for instance, for me, it's extremely interesting and important because I did not know many of the DESIS Lab now. And now, even though to know each other through the media is not as to be in presence, obviously, but now I have some ideas. And this, if we go on during the year with many different labs, we could start to establish a relationship that never happened before. So I'm not such enthusiastic normally about technology. I see many problems that can emerge and are emerging, but there is also something that is positive. So this, the cafe, but also the assembly that now we are doing, the relationships in between the very different people that participate is quite diverse than before, because before there was more or less, frankly speaking, the group that started, we know each other very well, and more or less we were the one that always met. And therefore the other, we met time by time if it happened to somebody of us to fly in America or in India or whatever. Now for the first time, not now with this cafe, but in the last months, we start to have a community that talk, and we can see each other. And of course, what you presented, for instance, for me, beyond the fact that you speak English too well for me, so there are somebody that speaks so perfect American English that maybe I do not understand everything, but also this is a part of the localism, to know that people do not understand everything. But I have a vision, so I start to have some ideas, and I think that is valid for me and for the other. And if you want, this is why I prefer now not to talk so much, but I'm very interested to listen, and I stop here for the moment.
So Deepa, you had a question in chat about repair culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Ezio, for chiming in, and thank you for showing interest in the question on repair. So, so my experience with repair comes from growing up in India. And so repair was such an integral part of the culture there that it wasn't thought of as something that, you know, I mean, you would only indulge in if you didn't have money, or you were not so affluent, or you were from a sort of a working class or labor class or something like that. Repair is such a ubiquitous phenomenon in India. We have repair smaller roadside shops, bigger shops. It is thoroughly integrated in our culture. We repair our things ourselves, and it's not just related to any gender. It's also a very feminist practice. You know, we'll see our moms fix a lot of things. They'll actually go to those repair spaces to get home electronics and other equipments getting fixed. So when I moved to United States, I saw that it is extremely difficult to get repaired something. My first experience was there was something jammed in the toilet, and when we called the plumber, he just said, you know, it's much better to get a new toilet, what, $400, than actually fix that one. And I just couldn't believe it. For like 5-10 minutes. I was under shock, I think, for the whole day, that it is so difficult to repair something as small as a toilet in this culture. And that led me to think in terms of why has repair not been a part of this culture? Because to some extent, design and designers are responsible for it, because we have created this very capitalist, modern, patriarchal system of design in which we are forced to buy and consume and toss away things because that's the way they have been designed and that's the way they have been produced and that is the way they've been marketed. And almost uncritically, a lot of Western cultures, especially North American cultures, have participated in that act of tossing away things and repeatedly sort of buying into that planned obsolescence. And so I see repair as a way to navigate that complexity, as an answer to that societal evil, the vicious cycle of continuous consumption. And right to repair, I mean, it has gained a lot of ground in Europe. Recently, there was a New York Times article in which it seems like a lot of both Democrat and Republican legislature in the United States are pushing for repair. There has been a lot of lobbying for repair of our own electronics and things things that are very important to our existence, like farm equipment. There is all this farm equipment that farmers cannot fix themselves, and they need to sort of invite people or sort of pay for experts and engineers and service people to come and fix those things for them because they are inaccessible. A lot of our devices, I mean, if anything happens, I don't know what to do with it except that get a new one, right? But this is not the way I grew up. And so for me, bringing back the act of repair as a critical practice, as a political practice, and as a decolonizing practice is very important, especially in design. I teach industrial design classes. I'm trained as an architect and industrial designer. And so I think in the pedagogy of industrial design, that's my entry point of bringing this practice into my teaching and training designers that have that ethos of repair built into the artifacts that they are designing. And I think it's very important for our society, for sustainability, for planet. And also sort of legitimizing the act of repair, because communities across the world, so Jugaad has a lot of sensibility, or at the core of Jugaad is repair. It's assemblage, but it's also repair. We are not just repairing our broken things, we are repairing our lives, we are repairing our communities, we are repairing our psyches that have been damaged by this capitalist modernity. And so for me, that's why I think repair is very important. It should be part of our pedagogy. It should be part of our teaching. It should be at the forefront. And that is what will challenge that sleek, shiny, cool objects that we are so trained to produce and consume. I hope that answers your question to some extent, Luis and Eleni. Thank you for that question.
Oh, Deepa, thank you for that answer. I'm so glad I asked the question. And it makes me think too that the way that you're discussing repair is a challenge to the conventional notions of circular economy. This is a beautiful dimension to those conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of communities do that actually, not only in Detroit. I'm seeing that as in Detroit, which many people would believe Jugaad is a word that comes from this third world country in India, and that's what people there do. But this is not the case. You will see that being practiced almost everywhere. In my other conversation in another group, I had someone from I think a southern state, can't remember, maybe Kentucky, and they said that was part of their life growing up here in North America itself. So it's not just people like me who find that we are somehow alienated by not having access to repair, but there are also a lot of Americans who grew up in doing these practices and in communities, and then they also find it quite challenging that these practices do not exist. But I'm because I'm invested in that concept, and psychologically I noticed a lot of repair word, and thankfully Detroit has that practice, because it looks like DIY is a very integral part of DNA of Detroiters. And I've seen a lot of places that do repair. You can actually, there are garages there, you can take your own car and fix it yourself and pay a small price for using that space. I find that quite interesting in the context of our conversations.
Nick has his hand up. Go ahead, Nick.
I wanted to talk more about, so often I have students who come from rural areas who grow up on farms and they take their tractors apart. And I want to talk, if we could talk about repair and self-reliance. I think there's a lot of expertise that comes, my car's not working and I'm a busy person, so I'm going to take it to someone who's an expert and pay a lot. Are there equations that we're making between, or that you're making, or between repair and self-reliance or repair and power? As opposed to, I think there's a strength that you say, I can do this myself, even if I do it not the way that it's supposed to be, but like a recreation.
Yeah, definitely. I think repair is about power. It is about power, and I don't see it any other way, because that is one way I can have control over the life I am living and the things I'm consuming and how I want to create my present and my future. I think IKEA has commercialized it and almost like McDonaldization of act of repair and doing things yourself. And our Western modernity has created these DIY maker spaces almost run by these tech bros who have taken this whole act of DIY and repair to another level, and then suddenly we don't feel part of that either. So where do we really belong? And so I think there should be these repair spaces is what we need. And there was one paper called 16 Bits by Chris Chisholm-Mikai, if I remember correctly, and I mean, but basically he wrote that there are fab labs everywhere. We just don't call them fab labs.
That's right.
Everywhere. And I think it's very important that we give legitimacy to practices like Jugaad, to practices like repair spaces, to practices like urban farmers who are and EPSI, who are not just running these bakeries, but these are these community spaces of repairing our souls in a way, of bringing together people. And so there's this bricolage happening at so many different levels. And I think it is totally about power, taking things in our own hands, and not relying on these capitalist systems to tell us what to do all the time.
Yeah.
I see that Roland asked a really interesting question. Roland, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, I like Deepa's notion of repair, and I think that's very close to the definition of design, at least those definitions that see design as improving one state to another state. And I think this is an ongoing constant effort. There's never the ideal state. What we perceive as ideal today might be unjust or unfair tomorrow, and vice versa. So I see this as a constant struggle to repair and fix and improve and build resilience. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Anybody else who repairs?
What?
Anybody else in the group who repairs? And I'm curious. Yeah.
Luis, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry. Yes, please go ahead.
I was just acknowledging that I repair and that it's become like part of the quality of my life to just not buy something, but to repair something. I have some pants that are so layered with, a lot of people do this, I'm not alone, but there is a joy in kind of claiming one's own world through repair.
Absolutely. I used to take my bike apart a lot when I was in high school, and I'd put it back together, and I'd always find a few parts that I had left out, but the bike still worked. So I always wondered what those extra parts were. What could I make with them, and how many extra parts we have, like the pieces of fabric that are tucked inside your shirts so that in case your body expands or contracts, you can add to that. I like to think that we could design and manufacture things that account for what Roland mentioned, that design as a continual repair activity, that objects and ideas are elastic and mutable, that we make things with the intention that someone will tinker with them rather than accept them as they are. I mean, that's what I always hope for my students, that they'll challenge my questions or assumptions rather than accept it as something that's done.
There's an interesting critique in chat now, Deepa and Nick and Roland, about aesthetics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's really interesting.
So, Jugaad DIY vernacular design can benefit from digital fabrication and open design.
Yeah, you see, among more affluent people, get involved in bricolage, on fixing things, can be even like passing the time, as entertainment. But among more poor people, that's sometimes the only way to move forward. No,
Right.
and sometimes this is a paradox because among poor people, at least in Brazil, doing like a vernacular solution or do it yourself sometimes is as a aesthetic symbol of poverty. You know, yeah,
Right.
I'm fixing something, therefore I'm poor. And for the rich, sometimes it could be like a way to show creativity and showing even showing a good. See, I'm respecting the environment, so I'm a good person. But see, so there's a challenge or changing the aesthetics, the aesthetic perception, putting. So on Monday, for example, one of my master's students is presenting his final work on the use of a vernacular solution, digital fabrication, open design. So he's basically trying to spread these innovations, vernacular innovations, into the wider community through digital fabrication, open design. But you see, so for example, in digital fabrication, I see as a way to contribute to the aesthetics. No, so if you got involved, this is more, if the language of the solution is more aligned to what I think is beauty, maybe I'll be more interested in getting involved on this. But I can tell you that there's a huge need for change the mindset, how people see. And for example, I see in the United States and other countries, quite common to people to have in a garage this huge set of tools to fix things and so on. But in more poor countries like Brazil, this is not available. What people have is a knife to use as a screwdriver and hammer, and how to do that, and still people see this as a good thing. I was speaking to Professor Anil Gupta from India. You know Anil Gupta?
Yeah,
a good friend of mine. And he was saying to me, in India, yoga, the way sometimes people keep what is not so good is yoga sometimes is used as an excuse to keep the underprivileged under the poor solutions.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, I mean, if we get into the nitty-gritty, those critiques are really valid, and there is an aspect of what about beauty, and isn't it as sort of a lazy attitude that anything goes. So as we say in Hindi, chalta hai. So that is a valid critique, and I know that jugaad cannot take one far, especially if you're thinking of science and technology. But that is not the point all the time. I mean, there's no one size fits all. Jugaad is not the answer for all the problems. Jugaad is not the only way. It is an alternative way to think about our lives. So we talk about pluriverses a lot. But right now, what we are living in is this monoculture, where everything is disappearing. We are just living these prescribed lives, which are basically designed by algorithms, and these apps designed by someone sitting in an air-conditioned Silicon Valley office. And most of us here are living that life, whether we want it or not. And so I see jugaad as a way, or these ecologies around jugaad as a way of showing an alternative way of existence, a pluriversal approach to making and being in the world. And Anil Gupta's point is also valid, but I see there were several hands up, so I'll stop talking.
Right. Ron's hand was up. Ron, before I let you speak, I just wanted to say that I really like that question about aesthetics. And I think maybe we need to think about how aesthetics and beauty can be decolonized, right? So that we can look at repaired artifacts as beautiful, that those aesthetics are beautiful, and recharacterize the criteria for beauty. Ron, I see that Ron's changed location, so I'm curious to know what's going on.
I'll pass to somebody who hasn't spoken yet.
You haven't spoken yet. Ron.
All right, so I was just trying to make the point that the reason on the in chat I put in a link to the appropriating technology website. So the reason we were using appropriation rather than repair was to look at that problem of, you know, when the wealthy are doing DIY, if that's just slumming and showing off, you know, I have so much spare time in my hands that I can do this. It's not really tapping into the power of Jugad, right? That power of lower socioeconomic classes to appropriate technology and make it their own. And so Deepa, one of the examples you have is the face mask made out of a couple of soda bottles, right? That's not repair, right? No. It's appropriating something that was made for a different purpose and then reconceiving it, reutilizing it, in some cases discovering implicit functions that you didn't realize were there, but are actually there. So there's a whole realm of that stuff. But the main example we were focused on, or at least one of the most prominent, was things like the scratch in hip hop. So when hip hop first started, you just had a vinyl record, right? But these DJs started using that vinyl record in ways that nobody had intended it to be used. And hip hop emerged out of that practice. The same with the lowrider car movement. So there's this whole vernacular engineering that emerged out of people re-engineering these hydraulics to do things that they weren't originally intended to do.
Roland's hand was up. Oh, sorry.
Ezio.
Okay.
Thank you.
Been waving for a while now.
It was waving and shouting, but my microphone was off, so only for my neighbors. No, thanks for every discussion that you are doing. They're very interesting. And in 10 minutes, I have to leave you. And I want only to say something on this final topic, and maybe one observation also on something else. The issue about repairing is a fascinating issue, and it's a kind of indicator of the state of our production and consumption culture. And therefore, it appears to be relatively modest, but in reality, it opens up the discussion to everything, from the very general philosophical view that we have about life and death, and what is the meaning of repairing continuity, toward the idea of care. What does it mean, care? Why we are a society without care? And repairing means to take care, but also it means, and mainly, the practical attitude toward this is when you say, so what we can do as designer. At least we should divide how we can try to repair or to apply a new repair attitude to what we have now. And this is very challenging, because the product have been done to be cheap and not repairable, because this has been the mainstream logic. And the things are not repairable to be more usable, to be more light, to be more compact. So there are some reason related to the user-centered approach that has pushed. Okay, this is also capitalism, do not misunderstand me, but the way in which we as designer, in my view, we have not always to say this is the capitalism, because the capitalism materialized through some objects, some service, some systems. So we have to be the one that are capable to translate the very general political issue in how it appears in the reality. And in my view, to simplify in the reality of the object, the fact that they are not repairable anymore is because they have to be very useful, very easy to be used, very usable, and also cheap, at least cheap when you buy it. And this is why very often are more the cheaper goods for the relatively poor that are less repairable than the very expensive one for the rich. And so on one side we say, okay, we have this big amount of non-repairable products, and what we can do on that, beyond trying to recycle or beyond burning and throwing it away. And this, we have had a lot of experience in terms of also creative, artistic way, but the only problem is that if you use a bottle of plastic bottle to make a mask, you will use maybe 100 plastic bottles, where the plastic bottles are in one day 100 millions of plastic bottles. So there is an issue about scale and quantity. And therefore, it's not a simple issue what we can do of what we have now. And the other one that is probably the most challenging, if we talk about the future, is how we can, in some way, introduce into the system of production some idea that permit to generate products that are capable to be regenerated. And it's not impossible. I don't know if you know, because this story is very old story, but you know what are the machines that are lasting more in time? What it is in your view? Modern machine that last in time for a long time. Airplanes.
Mm.
You are flying on airplanes that can have 40 or 50 years old, but they are being designed to be as a body continuously regenerated. So in reality, there are very few of what you see in an airplane that is the original one, but in time, the same engineering that have developed the products that have not to be reusable has also developed a way to have very reusable products. And this is a very engineering issue, how you manage them, how you design that single part, etc. And probably this should be studied more. When we talk about, you were talking about the makers before, and if we consider, for instance, the 3D printing, I'm not sure that it's in the good direction because the 3D printing is not reparable, for what I know, at least. On the contrary, the idea of having Fab Lab in every neighborhoods and to have some machine that permits to repair something could be fantastic. But in some way, we have to, well, to probably who is dealing with this maker culture on the side of the 3D printing and the side of that kind of technological digital fabrication. Well, it has to be very seriously thought, because in my view, they are producing a lot of garbage at the end.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
we have to be capable to say, okay, the very general philosophical talk, maybe we can have some quasi-artistic intervention that in any case could be interesting to make people more sensitive to the issue. But afterward, we have to use our knowledge and our capability to enter in the system and to see what does it mean in some way to produce something that should be, in any case, relatively cheap and usable, but at the same time conceived in the way that it can be done. And in my view, given that not everything that we have to do is related to social innovation, but theoretically here we are discussing about something related to social innovation. Everything is interesting, but it's not say that under the umbrella of social innovation, everything has to be inside. But in any case, it's very coherent with the social innovation, try to see what people has invented. But not only, I am afraid of Mr. Gupta too, and I know him since 30 years, but there is not only that one of this really vernacular way of working. This is one part and it could be very important, but we should develop something that could be also developed in a totally different technological environment. And maybe there are somebody that invented way of doing, invented way of reorganizing the production to generate something that could be reparable. Well, this is my story. Finally, I want to say only one thing, but I tell only the title and maybe it will be, I don't know if it is interesting, but if it is interesting, we could have another meeting on that. I see that so many schools now, when they talk what they do, they talk about speculative design. So in my understanding, the speculative designing is a way to introduce cultural issue into the design. But very frequently it becomes some kind of artifact that should, as an artifact, help in making people think. My question is, can we try to find a bridge in between speculative design and social innovation? Because speculative design per se could be very interesting, but it's not social innovation. It's a designer that invent some artifact that should trigger some conversation, trigger some thought, etc., etc. So it's totally driven by the design will to make something that has this kind of characteristics. But it could be, in my view, one of the tools that we can use in social innovation. In the same way that, for instance, one of the tools that are very consolidated in social innovation when the designers are part of the process are, for instance, making scenarios. So scenarios per se become something that help to feed a social conversation. So also the speculative design could feed the social conversation and therefore help in generating social change. But in my view, we as DESIS have a kind of responsibility in trying to make some steps. Any school, including your one, work on speculative design, okay? You also define yourself a DESIS Lab, okay? And we have to work a little bit more in connecting in which way these two kind of activities goes together. Why speculative, in which way speculative design become a possible tool in a social innovation process, and vice versa, why social innovation process could need some speculative design as can need other kind of design. And yes, sorry, maybe I've been a little bit long as always. This is why I try to contain myself. And well, in 5 minutes I will leave, so I take the chance of talking to thanks you so much. It was really very interesting and also so heartily interesting to see you. Who are you? What are your faces? So this is fantastic. And please go on.
Thank you, Ezio. Those were some really important questions that you raised, and I think the whole, we don't have time left. I think we are at the end of our session, but there's a whole, I think there are a lot of instructors, designers, educators who are answering the same questions that you have raised. I try to do that in my work as well. How is critical jugaad tied to this idea of critical design, and what is criticality in these low-tech making practices, and how can that aid in social innovation? And so I think that is a very beautiful takeaway for our session today. And there's all these amazing conversations happening in the chat. I'm not sure we have time for that. But there's all these links being shared about how speculative design can trigger social innovation, and some articles on Design Without Designers by Anne Burdick, and Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology. Nick has shared Sweet Potato Sensations. So if anybody is visiting locally, please stop by. And we really hope to see you all in person someday. And how can we continue this conversation offline? I think that's something we can. Teresa, maybe would you like to address that? Say a few words about how we can take this conversation further.
Yeah, I think we can use this platform to continue our discussion. So I hope that in the next DESIS Café we can continue. But nevertheless, we will share all the contents of the chat in the DESIS website. So if we want to continue in person to continue this discussion, and within each DESIS lab, we are all free to do that. So Audrey, I don't know if you want to.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was a wonderful conversation. I learned so much, and I do hope that we can continue talking about repair and appropriation and social innovation, sustainability, and all of the great topics that have come up from this discussion. One thing to think about in the future is maybe having some kind of reading that we all do ahead of the DESIS Café, and then we talk about it. So we would definitely love to engage the DESIS network in another DESIS Café in a year from now, if that is possible. But thank you so much. Go ahead, Ezio.
I have an idea. I think that in the nature of the DESIS Café, the conversation cannot go too much in depth. So
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not the DESIS Café. The DESIS this time has been quite very interesting, but it's more to know each other, to listen a little bit, to chat, and it cannot be done. But always our hero, Teresa, started another line that is called the conversation for the planet. So the idea could be, and I launched this to Teresa first and also to the other, that when in a DESIS Café, that in my view, it has to be maintained very informal, maybe even more light than today, because this is the spirit, giving space for more people to talk and knowing each other and drinking cafe, becoming nervous. No, but if there is some good idea, there could be somebody, for instance, in this case, could be you, your group, that curate a new conversation for the future. And the conversation for the future is a moment in which we have a topic, a conversation for the planet, sorry, it's a real title. Mm-hmm. And in my view, both the idea of repair or the idea of what is the connection between speculative design and the action into the society, that are two different topics. Maybe there are others. Mm-hmm. Well, it could become a topic for a conversation for the future. That is the way to go on in the discussion, beyond the fact that we can have a personal interaction. And right. Sorry if I have come back again talking, but I think that this could be a very nice connection in between the two things.
That's wonderful. We'd definitely be interested in hosting some kind of conversation like that. Thank you.
We have here also Pablo that will host the next DESIS Café on the 21st of July. So please save the date. We will be waiting for some tapas. Maybe it's a DESIS tapas instead of a DESIS Café. We are willing to get to know better your lab. So thank you all three.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Wait. Let's take a picture. Just.
Oh, yes.
Next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. It was great feedback. It was great, Nick.
Thank you.